What's going on? Welcome to Wildcast podcast. I am Justin Spears here with my guy Micah Lev. We are previewing the Arizona West Virginia football game going down this Saturday at Arizona Stadium, 4 o'clock kickoff on FS1. We'll have all the coverage on Tucson.com and the Wildcaster mobile app. We appreciate you guys for listening to the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and comment the Wildcast on Apple and Spotify, other podcasting platforms, and also check out the video version on Tucson.com. Always a good time here. We'll have our Big 12 picks for Big 12 Bonanza later on in the show, but let's get right to it. Arizona versus West Virginia. Lev, you said it before the podcast when we were off air that this seems like the Spider-Man pointing meme between Arizona and West Virginia, because these are two teams. Well, first and foremost, it is the Rich Rod Bowl, right? Rich Rodriguez formerly coached at both of these teams during his coaching journey, who's now at Jacksonville State. But in the Rich Rod Bowl, you got Arizona in one corner. They are 3-4. They're riding a 3-game losing streak. And then in the other corner, you have another 3-4 West Virginia team who's riding a 2-game losing streak. Both teams are dealing with injuries. On West Virginia's side, we don't know who's going to play quarterback. Garrett Green is banged up. Their running back, Jameel White, who's a sophomore, kind of a stud, he's also banged up as well. Wyatt Meelam, who's their star left tackle, he's been banged up. We don't know his status. So 3 very important players. They also have some other injuries as well. And then Arizona's defense is just littered with injuries. We heard later or earlier in the week that linebacker Jacob Manu is out for the season, and that adds to the list of guys like Traden Stukes, who's out for the season, safety Gunnar Maldonado, who I would probably say is out for the season because he still needs surgery, and there's only 5 weeks left of the year, so I'd probably bank on him ending this season and coming back next year after redshirting. But long story short, injuries on defense for Arizona, injuries on offense for West Virginia. I'm curious to see how this game's going to go. And I feel like, Lev, there's pressure from both fan bases on these two teams to win on Saturday.
Yeah, agreed with all the above. There's probably more pressure on West Virginia's Neil Brown because he's deeper into his tenure at West Virginia than Brent Brennan is here, although the fans are certainly not happy with the way things have gone so far for Brent Brennan in Tucson. Neil Brown was on the hot seat going into last year, and they kind of rebounded and had a pretty good season. And there was a lot of optimism in Morgantown, and things have kind of gone off the rails after they had a huge victory at Oklahoma State. Their last 2 games, they've been outscored. What's the total? 73-34. Which is obviously not great. Grant Green is an influential figure for this team. He's their leading rusher, on top of being their starting quarterback. So, if he's out and Nico Marchiol is playing instead, I mean, you might see a different looking offense. As Genesis Smith, who is Marchiol's teammate at Hamilton High School in Chandler, pointed out, one of them is a lefty, one of them is a righty. So that's one thing you probably want to note if you're an Arizona defender and you see Marchiol back there behind center. And I just don't think he's as big of a running threat, which, on paper would be a positive development for the Wildcats. I can definitely see kind of an ugly game in Tucson on Saturday between 2 banged up, desperate teams that are both struggling. But that's okay. If you come out on top, I don't think Arizona cares what the score is. They'll take a 2-0 victory on a safety if that's what it came down to. Because this, I don't know, I hate to use the term must win, but I feel like this is about as close as you're going to get for Arizona when you look at sort of the big picture, what they can still accomplish this season. If you don't hold serve at home against West Virginia and Houston, then you're probably not going to make a bowl game. Because if you do that and you lose your 2 road games, you're 5-6 going into the Territorial Cup, and you got a chance, right? That game's here, rivalry game. You never know what will happen. Obviously, Arizona State, they're playing better than Arizona right now, but strange things happen when those two get together.
And with Arizona currently sitting at 3-4, like mathematically, because they have 3 losses in conference play, because that Kansas State game doesn't count as a conference loss, like for some reason they could still somehow stay in the Big 12 picture, like if they run the tables. Now, is that going to happen? Probably not. But I thought Dwayne Aquina made an interesting point earlier in the week. He said, at first, Arizona football was shooting for the moon, and now we just got to land it safely. He compared it to Apollo 13 and their mission to the moon, and with a explosion in like an oxygen tank, they decided, okay, rather than accomplishing what we came up here to do, let's figure out a way to live to see another day, right? And Dwayne Aquina made that comparison. Some Arizona fans aren't really happy with that comparison because it's like, wow, you're pretty much saying our season's a train wreck. How can we somehow salvage this year? But it's kind of true, right? Because Arizona went into this year as a potential college football playoff team. I'm not going to sit here and say that, yes, Arizona going into this year, they were a bona fide CFP team. But you looked at the Big 12 and how wide open it was in a 16 team league with the CFP going up to 12 teams. And it was conceivable that Arizona could win the Big 12. Things have not happened the way it is. So now that the CFP dreams are kind of, put to rest, how can you have a memorable season that you can still enjoy? And I think right now the path is get to a bowl game, you beat ASU in the Territorial Cup because that game carries a lot of weight. And if you do that, maybe Arizona fans will kind of ease up on Brent Brennan a little bit.
Man, we're using up all our space game material this week, Justin. We should have
I know.
saved it for next week. If you're not watching us on video, Justin is wearing a NASA T-shirt. Arizona plays at UCF next week. That is the annual space game for the Knights. I think last year, if we're going to extend this analogy, that was Apollo 11. That was the moon landing, for Arizona. That was a big deal.
Yeah.
And it is hard to follow up when you're like the first man to step on the moon, what's the encore to that? And I love the analogy from Coach Aquina. I think it lends some insight into how he's feeling about things. Like he is patching things together with tape and whatever else he can find around the office. It is a very banged up unit on defense, but I will say, like, they play hard. He will throw wrinkles at the opponent. That dime defense last week, he said we might see that again this week. We might see more of the standard nickel look. Maybe it'll be a combination of the two. I think he's just kind of striving to put the best 11 out there at this point. Knowing how thin they are at linebacker, he might be reluctant to use both of his top 2 linebackers at the same time in case, to try to keep one of them healthy at the very least. But if you haven't seen Apollo 13, I don't think, Justin, you've seen that movie. I strongly recommend that'd be a good way for you to spend your Friday night before the game. Like, you might understand where Coach Aquino was coming from on that one.
Just got to put we got to fill the peg and then put some duct tape over it, and let's get this thing back home. But I was looking at Arizona's defense, after giving up, was it nearly 40 points against New Mexico, and the rushing yards, right? They couldn't stop the running quarterback. And then I was looking at the rushing yards, and they gave up over 200 yards rushing twice in the first 3 games. Since then, the most they've given up in a game is 147. So they've kind of gotten better at stopping the run. They've also forced takeaways in 4 consecutive games, some of them with multiple takeaways. People will look at the scoreboard and say, like, well, no, they're giving up a lot of points. Well, you have to look at what the Arizona offense is doing to
Or
put
not
the
doing.
defense or not doing to put the defense in some really tough spots. And, against BYU, against Colorado, we saw the other team have a lot of short fields. And that's tough to stop if you're a defense, right? So I think the defense, considering all the misfortune and bad luck they've had with injuries, I think they've gotten a lot better on that side of the ball. As far as the offense goes, Lev, man, I'm really curious to see how that goes this week because no Rhino Tapatotai. the starting left tackle. We're going to see a change up on the offensive line. I would imagine Big Jonah Savianaya is going to be playing at left tackle, and you might see some change up at guard. Joey Capra, the transfer from Nevada, who also played at San Diego State. He's a veteran that they added very late in the offseason. I mean, heck, they added him in the middle of training camp. So now that he's been able to get some reps in, they're expecting him to step in and fill a role at one of the guard spots. And, Michael Wooten, the transfer from Oregon, kind of wet the bed a little bit in his first look. But maybe now that he's preparing as a starter, maybe he will have a different approach, more confidence, and can be much better than what we saw. But I think really the one thing that I'm looking forward to most on offense, Lev, is how that offensive line looks. And you're actually writing about them for Cat Stats.
I am indeed. Well, it just shows you how desperate they are that Joey Capra is a guy they're looking at as possibly starting this week. Someone who was just sort of picked up off the scrap heap. No offense to him, but he was still out there, in August in the transfer portal, unclaimed. I think a parallel can be made between Michael Wooten and Owen Goss. Remember when Owen Goss had to go into the game against Kansas State after Traden Stukes got hurt? And he was just like deer in the headlights, like he struggled every which way. Since then, like he's been pretty solid, right? When he kind of, got his feet under him, kind of understood the speed of the game a little bit better. If Michael Wooten is the guy that they tap to play right tackle, hopefully he will be more comfortable with a whole week of practice and knowing that he's going in the game versus being thrown into the game. And yes, I am writing about the offensive line. I think the number one stat that stands out the most to me is that last year they used 5 different offensive line combinations in 13 games. They've already used 4, and they're about to debut a 5th, which will equal the number of combinations they had all of last season in game 8. So lack of continuity has been a huge issue up front. Also, some of the guys that they've played, very inexperienced. Like, we're mourning the loss of Rhino Tapatotai. Obviously he's going to be back eventually, but he's out for the season. This kid is a redshirt freshman who never played a game before this season. It's not like a Jordan Morgan who had a gazillion starts and was headed to the NFL as soon as he could get on the next plane. And then Alex Deuce, who's played a ton at guard, never played before, I don't believe, or very minimally. I think he's a redshirt freshman also, if I'm not mistaken. So, it's like, yes, they had some very good veterans back, but it's been difficult to find the right mix of guys. And it has been a huge, huge problem, especially lately with pass protection. Colorado had a greater than 50% pressure rate in that last game, which, I mean, it's just impossible for any offense to function when that's the case.
So the plan for Arizona, Roberto Miranda is probably going to get a lot more playing time as like a chip blocker. But then you also have to figure out a way to have those guys block and help out the offensive tackles, the offensive line, while also getting out and being available for Noah Fafita. Because I think getting the ball out of Noah Fafita's hands, I think that has to be a point of emphasis for Arizona moving forward, because a lot of these plays are just so slow developing. It doesn't really seem like there are multiple layers with some of these route runners. It seems like everyone is kind of going deep, right? And I would like to see Arizona's offense get the ball out of Noah Fafita's hands, but also the tight ends are kind of on double duty because they need to figure out a way to give Noah enough time to get the ball out of his hands rather than running around for his life, like we have seen over the last couple of weeks.
So you can look at PFF's data and figure out how often tight ends stay into block on passing plays. So I did that. And last year, they stayed in to block on passing snaps 21.3% of the time. This year, it's only 7.5% of the time. So they are really not utilizing the tight ends in the way that you are suggesting. It seems like that would be a good idea, especially when it comes to edge protection. Like that's the area where Arizona's been the most vulnerable, is the pressure off the edge. And it also speaks to just the structural differences between this offense and that one. Conversely, running backs are staying into block way more, 35.3% of the time versus 21.8% last year. So, like this offense, it's more of the running back's responsibility than the tight end. But, in general, the tight ends are better blockers than running backs. And when you're talking about protecting off the edge, it probably makes some sense to keep the tight end in a greater percentage of the time to just, stick your shoulder into that edge rusher or straight up double team him and give Noah Fafita time to read what's going on in the secondary, give those plays time to develop.
I'd expect Keem Burnett also to be back for Arizona this week after missing last week, which certainly helps in the passing game and also blocking game as well. All right, before we get to Big 12 picks for the week, I wanted to get your thoughts on Rich Rodriguez and
Yeah.
looking back at his tenure at Arizona. So, unfortunately, Lev, when you got to Tucson, Arizona, and you were the beat writer, you came at a time when the Rich Rod era kind of hit a valley. It was kind of a low moment, right? It was your first game, I think, was the 2015 New Mexico Bowl, which is Scooby Wright's last game,
Which was a
and then
win.
which was a win, and then it went right into 3-9 season in 2016. But hey, that season, if you ask any Arizona fan, what do you remember about that year? They're probably not going to say 3-9. They remember beating ASU, I mean, handily in the Territorial Cup, and did so by running the ball the entire second half, right? That's how people always remember that 2016 season. But then Rich Rod in 2017 found a spark with Khalil Tate, and then some other things off the field, away from the field, led to Rich Rodriguez being dismissed as the head coach of the Arizona Wildcats. Um, Rich Rodriguez led Arizona to a Pac-12 South title. They went to a Pac-12 championship. They lost in the Fiesta Bowl. A lot of highs, some lows, but you know what? Rich Rod was consistent in getting Arizona to a bowl game. So, no matter which way you splice it, I view the Rich Rod era as a success at Arizona. He was definitely a very fiery guy. You probably know that, Lev, from talking to him over several years in press conferences and media availabilities. But looking back at your time with Rich Rodriguez, what stands out to you?
Yeah, I obviously was only there for the tail end of things. One really difficult year and then one really fun year in 2017. 2016, that was definitely a year from hell, sort of similar to what's gone on this year in terms of the injuries. Pretty sure they
Yeah.
had to move Samaji Grant from wide receiver to running back at the end of the year because they just literally ran out of running backs that they could use, and he did well in that role. Rich Rod is a offensive savant, right? Like no matter who he's got, where he's at, he can dial up some offense. So that's certainly different from the way things are now. Defense was not his calling card, even though most of the draft picks from the Rich Rod era were actually defensive players. Ironically enough, I think that part of that is because the system was really the biggest asset that he had on offense. Like he found guys who fit into this particular system, a very college type of system where a lot of like RPOs and quarterback run game, up tempo, the types of things you see much more often on Saturdays than Sundays. I would say that you would have to view his overall tenure here as a net positive. They went to 5 bowl games in 6 years, which I think is unprecedented in Arizona football history. Maybe the ceiling wasn't as high as like the 2023 Wildcats, for example. A really like legitimately like top 15 caliber team, but the floor was pretty darn high for Rich
Yeah.
Rod. Like aside from that one year where they had a gazillion injuries, I mean, you were going to get that 7-5, 8-4 type of regular season. And hey, man, that sounds pretty good right about now, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think Arizona fans will take consistently going to a bowl game. But I think that 2014 season was probably the the peak for Rich Rod, and it was the perfect blend of the Mike Stoops era players, the guys who were leftovers after Stoops got fired in 2011, and also the guys that he brought along too, and they were able to go to the Pac-12 championship. They ran into a buzzsaw Oregon team that they beat in Eugene earlier that year, thanks to a Scooby Wright strip sack. But man, that was a really good team that Rich Rod had in 2014. And you know what? He also had some really good teams in West Virginia too, right? That's how
Oh
Rich
yeah.
Rod became Rich Rod with those
Oh yeah.
teams with Pat White and Steve Slayton. You probably remember those teams very well.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, that's where I believe that was his first head coaching job. That's also where he's from.
Yep.
So I'm sure that that program means a lot to this game. They played on Wednesday, so he will be an interested viewer. If you haven't seen it already, I wrote about his son Rhett, who's now an analyst at West Virginia, working for his dad. He was out of football for a couple years, decided to come back in, join the family business. You remember talking to Rhett when he was in high school here, Catalina Foothills, and then at Arizona. Like, you were like, this guy is going to be a coach someday, right? Like, super smart, knew everything you could hope to know about offense. He also suffered a really scary, like, partially collapsed lung when as a player in 2021. And there were sort of some immediate complications after the fact. And I went into detail on all that. So you should check out that story if you haven't already. But yeah, it's the Rich Rod Bowl, and neither team might, the total points of the two teams might not get up to like 30 in this game, which is also kind of ironic because, as we mentioned, Rich Rod is known much more for offense than he is for defense.
Also, your boy Tony Fields played
He
at
did.
Arizona and West Virginia. He's now playing for the Cleveland Browns. Scotty Young Jr. was also a guy who went to West Virginia. That was such a weird time, right? Because
Oh yeah.
Arizona, that was supposed to be a year where, even though Kevin Sumlin struggled in his first couple years, that season with Colin Schooler, Tony Fields as veterans coming back, Brendan Schooler, who's like a special team superstar for the New England Patriots, he was playing for Arizona at that time.
Yep.
And then a thing called COVID-19 hits. And because of the uncertainty with the Pac-12, guys who are trying to improve their draft stock, like the guys we just mentioned, they're like, we got to go somewhere where it's a guarantee that we're going to play. So Big 12's playing football. Let's get over there and let's play for West Virginia. And Colin Schooler also played for Texas Tech too. So Rich Rod, Tony Fields, and Scotty Young Bowl.
Yeah,
Unique connections
indeed.
there.
Indeed. That was such a weird time. I was a big fan of Tony Fields and Colin Schooler. They were super productive. They played from day one as freshmen, and they would come into those press conferences, win, lose, or draw, and answer all the questions. I have the utmost respect for anyone who does that. It's one of the reasons I think, and we've talked about this a little bit, that people like Noah Fafita so much. Like, he's accountable, he's
Yep.
responsible. Never blames anyone else but himself. Although, when you look at the offensive line and the way that they've played lately, maybe you could put a little blame on him. He would never do that. I'll do that.
Yeah.
I don't have as high a character as Noah Fafita.
You're going to do that cat stats. All right. Let's move on to everyone's favorite segment, Big 12 Bonanza.
It's my favorite segment this week.
Because Lev, man, you were on the money last week. Did you even lose at all?
I did lose a couple games, including my pick to click in my column, which is like super upsetting considering that I went 6-2 against the spread and 7-1 straight up. Brett Farah, our sports editor, he was 5-3 straight up and against the spread. Justin 4-4 in both. So season-long standings against the spread, Brett and I are tied at 31-27. Justin is one game behind at 30-28. Straight up, I'm 38-20. Brett 37-21. Justin 34-24. Justin, you came so close to hitting that Oklahoma State outright upset on Friday night. There might be some games like that this week where some of us are picking some outright upsets. So more of that kind of action on the table. You ready to get started?
Let's do it, man.
Okay, so there have been a lot of Friday games in the Big 12. I think we all like that. Not the case this particular week. We will start out with BYU at UCF. BYU is ranked 11th in the country. This game is on ESPN. It is a 12:30 kickoff here in Arizona. And when I sent out the lines to you guys last night, BYU is getting 2 points, not getting 2 points, despite being the 11th ranked team in the country. A little bit of vulnerability shown by the Cougars last week. They gave up 269 rushing yards against an Oklahoma State team that had not been able to run the ball at all heading into that game. And you're playing a team that runs the ball extremely well. UCF, despite their overall struggles, they had 354 yards on the ground at Iowa State and nearly won that game. Those games were also the Spider-Man gif, like the UCF Iowa State game and the Oklahoma State BYU game, very similar. The problem that UCF has is they've gone to Ja'Cory Brown at quarterback, and he was 8 for 20 for 62 yards with 2 picks in that game. So they're kind of one-dimensional, but I'm still going with UCF in this one. Cross-country journey for BYU. They had a close call. I think they're a good team. They're way better than we thought. Are they truly like a top 12 team in the country? I'm not so sure. I think it's a tough spot for them, so I'm taking the Knights.
Yeah, going cross country, I think is going to be a tough battle. And like you said, UCF, even though they haven't really been the same UCF team that we saw to start the season, a team that runs the ball very well at home against a BYU team that is really not look so good since beating Arizona. I think I'm going to go with the UCF Knights going into their space game, which they don't lose. So UCF can kind of rip off a couple of wins here.
Yeah, maybe get a little bit of momentum back in their season, which started out really well and then kind of went off the rails a little bit, which we can relate to. Brett is taking BYU in this one. All right, Oklahoma State at Baylor. This is also a 12:30 start in Arizona. This is an ESPN Plus game in Waco. And Oklahoma State, kind of a preseason co-favorite in the conference. It's really fallen on hard times. Almost pulled it off on Friday night at BYU. They are getting a touchdown in this game. 7 points is the spread. Cowboys are having to go back to Alan Bowman at quarterback because of an injury at that position. And Alan Bowman's thrown 9 interceptions this season, which is the second most in the league. Noah Fafita has the most with 10. The good news for Oklahoma State, though, Ollie Gordon got back on track last week. He had 16 carries for 107 yards and 2 touchdowns. Meanwhile, Baylor, as predicted by me, they won straight up at Texas Tech. They scored 59 points in that game. They've been averaging 28 points. Sawyer Robertson absolutely went off and had 5 touchdown passes. I think they were +3 in the turnover margin. So Baylor looking really good. Oklahoma State having to go back to the quarterback that they don't really want to play. I'm going to take Oklahoma State to win straight up. I'm embracing the chaos of the Big 12. There's really kind of no statistical or analytical reason to do it other than this is just how this league is going to go. So that's where I'm at.
Pokes, baby. I got to do it again. I got to go Oklahoma State to pull off the win on the road. Ollie Gordon, not only did he have a good game, especially in that first half, but man, I thought he suffered a couple of season-ending injuries the way that he walked off the field, and then he just kept coming back like Michael Myers, right? Like I'm like they're going to have to put him in the full body cast, and he just kept coming back time after time after time and continue to be such a tough running back. I think Ollie Gordon gets it going. I'm going with the Cowboys.
Yes, Brett is taking Baylor to win and Oklahoma State to cover. So we are all taking the 7 points. Okay, Texas Tech at TCU. This is another game with a 12:30 p.m. kickoff in Arizona. This game is in Fort Worth. Texas Tech is getting 6.5 points. This game is on Fox. And when you look at TCU, hey, ugly win. They all count the same, right? 13-7 against Utah in the late night window on Saturday. So you'll take it, right? Texas Tech, meanwhile, very offensive team still. Like they're first in the league. Or I'm sorry, they are second in the league in total offense against a TCU team that's first in the league in passing offense. Texas Tech is last in passing defense. So this has a lot of potential, I think, to be one of those old-fashioned Big 12 shootout type of games. But I think the difference is going to be Taj Brooks. He's the biggest workhorse running back that we have in the Big 12. I mean, the rare back these days where you can give him the ball 25 or even 30 times in a game. You can control the game on the ground. I don't think that Texas Tech is going to turn the ball over as much as they did against Baylor. So again, I'm embracing the chaos here. I'm taking the underdog on the road to win the game straight up. I am taking the Red Raiders.
Me too. Give me Taj Brooks and Texas Tech. I think the Red Raiders are going to figure out a way to feed Taj Brooks the ball, and if they can control time of possession and not turn over the football, I think the Red Raiders will win. Taj Brooks, I think he had 3 touchdowns against Arizona when they were down here in Tucson. It kind of Arizona offense. I think the Wildcats own time of possession in that game. I think the Red Raiders are going to figure out a way to dominate time of possession, get Taj Brooks going. I like the Red Raiders.
Yeah, I thought I was going out on a limb, but all three of us are taking Texas Tech to win this game. I think maybe, I don't know, we might all be wrong. Probably will be wrong, but I think
Congrats,
maybe
TCU.
we're understanding this whole Big 12 thing a little bit more now that we're halfway into the season or so. All right, Arizona games at 4 p.m. We'll skip that one and leave it for the end. Also at 4 p.m. on ESPN Plus, you've got Utah at Houston. Utah is giving 3.5 points in this game. Utes are struggling big time. They have switched their offensive coordinator, Andy Ludwig, longtime OC in Salt Lake City, has stepped down. So they're trying to address that issue. We've seen this happen a handful of places across the country with struggling offenses. If you look at their last 3 games, 10 points, 19 points, 7 points. It's hard to win that way. They only had 267 yards against TCU. They were 2 for 15 on third down. Oof. Meanwhile, Houston, it seemed like they had kind of righted the ship. And man, did they get pounded by Kansas last week. They allowed 467 total yards. They threw 4 interceptions. They allowed 6 sacks. Like everything that could go wrong did. Zion Chris, the quarterback who'd been a spark for them, he got hurt in that game. Apparently, he's going to be back this week. Which is good news for them. But they're going up against, one of the best defenses in the country. No matter what problems Utah has had on offense, its defense is still really good. So I am going to take the Utes to end their losing streak, lay the 3.5 points, and get a win at Houston.
I'm right there with you. I think Utah gets it done on the road. Firing Andy Ludwig, or he resigned.
Mutual parting of the ways.
Yeah, which I think is a nice way of saying, hey, we appreciate your services, but yeah, you ain't.
They're no longer needed. Yeah.
Let's move on. I think Utah finds their breath of fresh air that they've been looking for on offense. Now that they know who's playing quarterback, right? Isaac Wilson is the guy. I think the Utes get it done on the road against a tough Houston team. Like, again, the Big 12 is so crazy this year. It would not shock me one bit if somehow Houston was able to win this game, but I like the Utes.
Yeah, Brett is also taking Utah. I'm a little concerned. We have a little too much consensus going here, Justin.
I know.
Usually not a good sign. Okay, moving on. So Kansas is at Kansas State. This game is at 5:00 on ESPN2.
Arrowhead?
It's in Manhattan.
Oh, Manhattan. Okay.
So the Jayhawks are getting 10 points in this game. So I learned, Justin, that this matchup is called the Sunflower Showdown between Kansas and Kansas State, and they play for something called the Governor's Cup. So as we learn the traditions of the Big 12, this is kind of a big deal. a big rivalry. As mentioned, Kansas finally had its get-right game this past week after losing a bunch of games in a row, coming off a bye. Jalen Daniels, super sharp, 16 for 21, 247 and 3 touchdowns. Devin Neal got it going on the ground, 17 for 108 and 2. Kansas State, though, man, I think they're the best team in the league, the most well-rounded team. They've won 3 in a row since that loss against BYU, and especially noteworthy this past week and noteworthy for our game, like Kansas State only rushed for 114 yards at West Virginia, and that's usually their bread and butter.
Yeah.
Avery Johnson, 19 for 29, 298 yards, 3 touchdowns. I really think the end of that game against Colorado, where he rallied them back and threw the winning touchdown pass, is like maybe the turning point for his career, and he's really on the ascent. So I'm going to take Kansas State to win the game. But Kansas, I like the way they played last week. It's a rivalry game, so I'm going to take the 10 points and take the Jayhawks to cover.
Kansas State, like you said, one of the better teams in the Big 12, and their bread and butter is running the football. I think that's all they're going to do. They're just going to run the football, use those 3 guys that they have in Avery Johnson, DJ Giddens, Dylan Edwards. They're such a dominant, powerful football team. And I like Kansas State to not only win, but I got them winning by a couple of touchdowns too.
Yeah, they're kind of like if North Dakota State had better players when you watch them, you know?
North Dakota State with NIL.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no offense. I mean, North Dakota State's awesome. Obviously, it was a very difficult game for Arizona when they were here. I mean, they took Colorado to the wire earlier this season, but they're just like they do the unfun things so well, blocking and tackling. When you watch Kansas State, you're like, man, this team is just so sound in everything they do. If they don't turn the ball over, they're probably going to beat you. All right.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think they have the best rushing defense in the Big 12. Did you mention that? Kansas State?
They do. It's true.
So
first in rushing defense at 83.1 yards per game allowed. So
they're going to make Kansas one-dimensional. No way. Give me the Wildcats.
Yeah, good call. Okay. We have one more game before we get to ours. This is the nightcap, another 8:15 p.m. start in Boulder, 7:15 p.m. Here in Arizona. Cincinnati is going to Colorado. Both teams are doing really well. They're both 5-2, 2 of the more surprising teams in the league. Of course, this game is on ESPN because ESPN loves them some prime time, some coach prime. Cincinnati is getting 5.5 points in this game. Travis Hunter is supposed to play more and be more effective, according to Deion Sanders. So that's kind of I think the number one headline in this one. Thanks to their 7 sacks last week, the Buffaloes now lead the league in sacks, which is, should play in their favor against a pretty good Cincinnati, well-balanced offense. Brendan Sorsby's played really well. The Bearcats, they got off to a great start against ASU last week. They were up 24-7 at the half, and they kind of had to hang on for dear life. The final was 24-14. Sun Devils missed a couple field goals in that game, leading Kenny Dillingham to call for a tryout of kickers. That was the whole thing. Cincinnati's weird in the sense that they are 14th in the league in total defense, but 4th in scoring defense. The reason for that is that they are first in red zone touchdown percentage allowed, allowing only 42% touchdowns when other teams get in the red zone. So to me, that's what it's going to come down to. Like, Colorado's going to move the ball. Can they score touchdowns instead of field goals? I really like the way Colorado's playing right now. I think they have a great home field advantage as well. So I'm going to lay the 5.5 points, and I'm going to take the Buffaloes.
Well, Colorado, they got to figure out a way to run the ball whenever they get inside the red zone. And I think Cincinnati, if I'm not mistaken, do they have one of the better defenses, the better rushing defenses in the Big 12, or are they near the bottom?
Well, in terms of yardage, they're just okay.
Yeah.
They're just okay. They are a bend but don't break type of defense.
Well, man, Colorado's offense, they look smooth. They really, I mean, they made a couple mistakes last week against Arizona, but I thought they capitalized on every single opportunity that was given to them. I think if Shedeur Sanders doesn't get too crazy and starts throwing a bunch of picks, I think Colorado's going to be just fine. Um, I do think Cincinnati, though, is going to play them tough. I think the Bearcats are going to cover this game. I got Colorado by a field goal.
Look at you going out on a limb. Brett is also taking Colorado. In terms of, I just looked it up. Cincinnati is actually 14th in the league against the run, allowing
Oh,
168.6 yards. So
so Colorado, if you get inside the red zone, there you have it. Against that rushing defense, you got to figure out a way to get your running backs going, or maybe jet sweeps, stuff like that.
or maybe RPO even,
Yeah, true.
because Shador he's a pretty good runner.
Yeah.
He's not like incredibly fast, but he's smart and opportunistic when it comes to running the ball. All right, last game of the day. It's West Virginia at Arizona. This game is on FS1. It's a 4 p.m. kickoff. We don't get a lot of those here in Tucson, which is like a perfect time, especially this time of year. You know, the sun will probably be behind the west side stands for most of the people sitting on the east side. So it'll be really nice to have a game at that particular time. Arizona's favored in this game, Justin. Someone had to be, right? They're favored by 3.5 points. The interesting part about this, when you look at the numbers, is West Virginia is really good against the run, and they struggle to defend the pass. And Arizona does not pass the ball really well. At least they haven't lately. So something's got to give, right? Either West Virginia's, going to have a breakthrough game with their pass defense, or Arizona is going to find something in the pass game. I am going to take Arizona to win this game because it's at home and they are as desperate as you can be. And I think there is a lot of character on this team. There's a lot of fight still left in this team, but I'm going to take the 3.5 points. I think it's going to be a field goal game, whether it's going to be a walk-off field goal or that's just going to be the margin. I see this as a 3-point contest. So I'm going to take the Wildcats to win and the Mountaineers to cover the 3.5.
Ooh, that's such a tough spread. I'm also going with the Wildcats to win in a field goal fashion. I'm going Arizona 17, West Virginia 14. That's going to be your final score. I think hammer the under with these two teams. They're both banged up. I think this is going to be a very sloppy game. Arizona's offense is still trying to find what they're good at and their bread and butter. And I think that, maybe you're going to see some differences with tight end usage. Would love to see Tetairoa McMillan get the ball. 5 targets last week. Having the best wide receiver in college football, he's got to have the ball more than 5 times. I know that they've been, bracketing him and, sometimes he's in double coverage, but, jet sweeps, motion him. Like, I don't know what Arizona needs to do, but they got to find some ways to get T-Mac the ball because not only is he a great pass catcher, like he's got the great radius, but man, he can maneuver in space. I think he's Arizona's best runner with the football. Of course, that game against Texas Tech, he got the ball punched out. So ball security is something that I think T-Mac needed to work on, but he is Arizona's most dynamic player. And if you want a chance to win football games, you got to figure out a way to get him the ball. So I think this is going to be a big game for T-Mac. And then I also think, not to use the old Jetfish mantra, but it's personal. I think that, Quali Conley is going to have a big game because this game means a lot to him. This is a breast cancer awareness game, and his mother, Renisha, is currently in her second battle with breast cancer. She's in town. The whole Conley family is in town, or at least I think just his parents. And they have a pre tradition that started back when he was at Utah Tech, formerly known as Dixie State, and she came to every single game and braided his hair the night before the game. And this game's going to mean a lot to Quali Conley. They're going to wear pink tape, pink gloves, pink towels, and for Quali, playing in front of his mother for the breast cancer awareness game as she's dealing with breast cancer. It was really hard to see him sit on that stage and talk about it with Brent Brennan sit right beside him. I think that was a great gesture by Brent Brennan. Shows the kind of character that coach has. And I think that this is going to be a big game for Quali, big game for T-Mac, and I think Arizona figures out a way to get it done.
I would love to see Arizona run the ball more, even though the numbers suggest that you should try to pass against West Virginia. I just think it would make everything easier and would take a lot of pressure off the offensive line, take a lot of pressure off of Noah Fafita. If they could get the run game going, I will have some numbers in my Cat Stats feature about the offensive line that show that they're actually they're not a bad running team if they would just stick with it. So people can check that out. Brett, by the way, is taking Arizona to win and
Oh,
cover. So Brett usually like 3.5. He sees that as 3. Like, so in his mind, he's like, are they going to win by more than a field goal? That's the way he does it. So, hey, good on him. You know, Brett, I feel like among the 3 of us, he's the one who most often goes against Arizona. So when he thinks the Wildcats are going to win, they probably are. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like this is a punting is winning type of game here. Field position. Arizona's got a great kicker. My final score, I'm going to say 19-16. Should be 1 touchdown and 4 field goals. But again, they won't care what it looks like as long as they get the W and they can get to 4-4.
Absolutely. Arizona taking on West Virginia, 4:00 kickoff on Saturday at Arizona Stadium, but you can also watch the game on FS1 as well. We'll have all the coverage from Arizona Stadium. Go to Tucson.com. Also download the Wildcaster mobile app. And as always, please subscribe, rate, and comment the Wildcast podcast.